Wonderful. I'm going to be talking today about modelling and scaffolding, classical languages. My name's Lottie. I've put my university down there because I'm finishing my school job in like 2 and a bit weeks. Yeah, if you want to ask me about anything, probably my university email's the best one to go for. I'm going to be co-leading the PGC at the University of Sussex next year, and on Twitter or X, it's Miss C Mort. Fantastic. So first, we're going to start thinking about cake. Why are modelling and scaffolding important? And I want you to think, does your lesson ever resemble a technical challenge from the Great British Bake Off? So some of you probably not British Bake Off fans, but in every episode there's something called the technical challenge. And in the technical challenge, all of the contestants are asked to make an elaborate cake. They're given a load of ingredients. They're not shown what it is, and sometimes the instructions can be rather minimal. So here's an example down here when they were told to make Belgian buns, and the instructions literally said, make Belgian buns filled with lemon curd and sultanas, and then pipe icing in a zigzag pattern on top. And oh yeah, your oven should be at 180 degrees. And that's all they were given. And sometimes do we give enough instructions in the classroom? And also in the technical challenge, they might be asked to make fancy cake like this, but they will have never seen it before. And they're not given that model of what to aspire to. They're not shown how to do it. And sometimes you end up with cakes down here that look a little bit of a disaster. So to avoid kind of this in our classroom, it's really important that we do modeling, include modeling and scaffolding. So what are they? Um, we've oh, lost my train of thought there. So for a long time, we've talked about differentiation, which is tailoring teaching to meeting the individual needs of each student in our classroom. However, the term's gone out of favor quite recently, probably because the amount of baggage that's kind of associated with it. In trying to differentiate lessons, you had teachers ending up trying kind of 30 different worksheets for 30 different students. We had lesson objectives, almost some. So some of our students were not aiming for the same as others. And we ended up with all these strange mutations creating high workload in our classrooms. Now we're kind of moving on. You will probably have heard the term adaptive teaching to respond to the strengths and needs of all pupils. So we're still responding to everyone, but it's much more, I would say, a more whole class emphasis rather than lots and lots of different things with different people doing different stuff. Adaptive teaching is very much an umbrella term, and we've got lots of different things underneath it. And two of the things that can help us adapt our teaching to the needs of every student in our class are modelling, so guided examples showing students the process before they attempt the task themselves, but also scaffolding. And the EEF refers to scaffolding as these temporary supports that is removed when it's no longer required. And this provides enough support so that pupils can successfully complete tasks that they could not yet do independently. And a really important thing about scaffolding is it does need to be removed eventually. Imagine if you had scaffolding in front of your house, you don't want it there forever, but it's there to kind of help students reach the independence. So another analogy, imagine that I wasn't going to teach, we weren't teaching Latin or Greek. Imagine you were learning to ballroom dance instead. One thing that would not happen would you to be shown an elaborate, complex step, I don't know, some strange lift, and be expected to recreate it straight away. So why do we sometimes do this in our classroom? Here's a complex construction, go do it. You would watch the new step at full speed. What are we aiming for? You might then watch a walkthrough of the step, but slowed down with an explanation of what's happening each stage. You then might practice the footwork of the step individually, if you're a lead or a non-lead, doing it differently, and the teacher would model and explain what you're doing as you're doing it. You might then practice that step with your dance partner, but you wouldn't add in the music at that time. You'd be getting feedback from the teacher throughout, and then practicing the step with music, and then finally integrate it into a routine with maybe some other steps that you have learned along the way. Seems quite obvious, really, but sometimes we miss this out a little bit when we're teaching Latin. We show something, we expect students to be able to do it, and we don't always give them the support or break it down that we need. I mean, I'm very guilty of this too. I very recently taught a lesson on the ablative absolute. That was rubbish, and I had to reteach it because I didn't put enough steps in it. And when I reflected back on that lesson, I was like, oh yeah, I did not, there wasn't enough modeling, there wasn't enough scaffolding, and I needed to explain it better. And we all do that. And I suppose this session is a little bit of a reminder, getting us to pause. Do we do enough of this in our everyday teaching? So who really champions modeling and scaffolding? I think it's always good when we're looking at something like this to look at the theory that's out there. Rosenshine, quite trendy in the last few years. If you've not heard of Rosenshine, Barack Rosenshine, what he did was looked at lots of different studies of lots of excellent teachers, and he came up with originally 17 principles of instruction, and then he narrowed it down to 10, kind of the principles of instruction that the most effective teachers do. And then Tom Sherrington kind of later came along, and what he does is he sequences a lot of Rosenshine's principles of instructions. And this is a poster from Oliver Pagiglioli. And what he's done is he's kind of put some little pictures on it as well. So providing models and providing scaffolds are very important. It's what Rosenshine has identified. He says it's super important that we present new material using small steps. We don't just do it all together straight away. We then provide those models. So we include the importance, worked examples, and linking back to Julie's presentation this morning, the whole aim of providing models is sort of reducing that cognitive load. And we also provide scaffolds for difficult tasks. And once again, it's really important that that support is gradually withdrawn eventually. An analogy here, stabilizers on a bike are really powerful aids to the learning and confidence building, but you can't use your stabilizers forever. Similarly, for Allison and Tharby in their work, making every lesson count, modeling is a really, and scaffolding are a really important part of their principles. Here's one of their visuals. We've got all our little learners at the bottom, and all of our learners in our classroom, whether you're teaching a group of mixed attainers, or if you are in, I suppose, like a grammar setting, even though you might have more higher attaining students, there will still be differences between them. All of your learners start at different learning points, and we need to kind of all give them the supports to reach that top, to reach excellence. And well, they might be different, but we can look at what those supports look like to get all of our students to where we want them to be. Allison and Tharby came up with kind of their principles of what expert teaching requires: challenge, explanation, modeling. After modeling, students engage in deliberate practice. We have questioning throughout, and feedback. And throughout the questioning and feedback stages, we provide scaffolding to help them achieve their deliberate practice. Tharby and Allison, they have their two essentials of day-to-day modeling. What's really important when we model is don't assume that students know how to do something that they've never been taught to do. I think we use so many key terms in Latin. We talk about nouns, verbs, cases, indirect statement, indirect command. And sometimes we make assumptions. So don't do that. And I suppose even if students have been taught, don't assume that they can remember it. So for example, if you're teaching indirect question, don't assume students can automatically remember how to form a direct question. And Allison and Tharby also say that we always need to model high, and it's through our modeling that we set the benchmark for excellence. We need to have high expectations of all of our learners, and through modeling and scaffolding, we can help them get there. But you might be looking at this thinking, oh my goodness, that's really difficult. You're talking about these modeling and scaffolding. Isn't that going to create lots of work for me? And well, you're probably already doing it anyway. So the EEF on their guide to do with one of their SEM guides, they produced a little 1 page on scaffolding. And some of them are really simple: visual, verbal, and written. Visual things, we might have pictures support learning. You might just break down your sentence using some different colors when you're explaining, I suppose, a new grammatical conjunction. Verbal, we do this all of the time when we go through our classroom. How many times does a student put up their hand and like, miss, I'm stuck on this sentence, I don't understand? And you go over to them like, well, who's in the sentence? The man. What are they doing? Well, living. Where? In a house. And often even those little questions, the verbal questioning, is a form of a scaffold to help our students achieve the task. Um, and similarly, we might have written scaffolds. You don't have to write loads and loads of extra stuff. A word bank, give them some extra vocab. Writing frame, if you're teaching literature, we'll give them some sentence starters on how to do like that 16-mark essay. So some of these things can be really, really simple, visual, verbal, and written. But also, I think it's a little bit of a mindset when we're teaching that we need to have in the back of our mind. Lemov, in his Teach Like a Champion, on his section on lesson structure, this isn't a technique. His book Teach Like a Champion has loads of techniques in it, but I do, we do, you do isn't really a separate one. It's more how we structure and think about our lessons. And when we're teaching, do we go through these phases? I do. Do I tell and show students how to do it? Do we have a we do section? Well, I'll do it, but get the students to help me. Or should I get a student to kind of have a go and then I help? So perhaps I might ask one of my students, oh, have a go at this sentence, and then you might chip in to help. And then do students have a section of independent practice? And this theme for modeling should be underpinning what we're doing. I kind of teach, we do a bit together, students have a go at their own, get some feedback in between. Do I need to reteach it? Is there anything students are finding a little bit challenging? And I know it's a little bit annoying coming to these CPD events and people talking about theory and not really giving you any concrete examples. I'm going to try and give you some concrete examples, but I would say when it comes to modeling and scaffolding, it is a lot about thinking about what you want your students to learn. So how do I effectively do it? The starting point. What is it we want our students to learn today? Do we want them to be able to translate sentences containing the dative case? Do we want them to know the difference between nominative and accusative? Do we want them to be able to translate a large chunk of text? What do we want them to learn? And then we need to think about, well, what are the barriers to that learning? What is stopping them achieving that? Maybe they don't have any vocab knowledge. Well, what support can I do to be able to access that learning? Well, I want them to learn about the dative case, but they haven't got very good vocab. But I don't want them to spend the whole lesson learning vocab. So, well, I can just provide that vocab, and that is one of the barriers that is overcome because I want them to be thinking about that. It's too cognitively overwhelming. We need to ask ourselves, have we shown students worked examples? Have we actually shown them how to do it? And as we do that, are we narrating the process? So for example, dative case again, right, I've got this verb at the end and it's a verb of giving. So if I've got a verb of giving, I've got a little alarm bell in my head. Maybe I'm going to have a noun in the dative case to go with it. Let's have a look through my sentence. And I'm narrating that process as I'm doing it. But also it's really, even though we're talking about modeling and scaffolding to make Latin and Greek more accessible, we also need to think about, well, where are we going to put the challenge? Because we do need to make sure our students are challenged as well. Modeling and scaffolding is not about making everything super easy. It's about making the learning accessible. We still need to put in layers of challenge as well. Latin's really complex. Reading any language is really complex. So let's have a look at this sentence. Mercator canibus cibum ostendebant. What do our students have to know to be able to read this sentence? Well, they have to know we've got a merchant. We have to know we've got a dog. We have to know there's food. And we also have to know that there's some showing going on. I think I made this a slide originally for non-specialists, so I haven't even used the words nominative and dative. So we know we've got a nominative, we've got plural dative here, we've got a singular accusative, and then we've got a verb in the perfect tense. So our students have to know we've got some was or were plus in going on. So to be able to get our sentence, our students have to know the vocab, they have to know about noun cases, they have to know about singulars and plurals, they have to know about tenses, and you guys are over that one, word order. It's quite overwhelming if you're a beginner student for Latin. For us, it's every day. So when we're teaching sentences like this, we need to pick and choose, well, what is it we want our students to be thinking about? What can we remove? How can we scaffold? You can see here that I've already put a small scaffold on it, put some endings in bold. That's a scaffold, super simple. But all I've done is just put it in bold to draw the students' attention to it, so that they don't have to separate that out themselves. One thing I think some of us are quite guilty of, when we're teaching Greek, here's the alphabet, go transliterate some words. It's a cognitively overwhelming task. It's something perhaps we could model, we could scaffold a lot more. For example, handwriting in Greek, learning new letters. They haven't learned to do that since they were 3, 4, 5. So showing the students, modeling that process. How do I form those letters? I don't know, up, down, flick. This was a little video I did during lockdown where I couldn't use a whiteboard. Going through that transliteration process, talking through the choices. Is it an eta? Is it an epsilon? How do I make that choice? We do this quite a lot already. If you do a reading course using model sentences, they are a model. They are a scaffold to access that language. The CLC and Subarani that's got kind of, I suppose, a more cartoon style. The pictures help us to access the text. Hic vir est Gaius Salvius Liberalis. We as a teacher, okay, who is this man? Where is he living? When we have Salvius multos servos habet, okay, servus, 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 servus. What does Salvius have? We can do that questioning. Not every course will obviously have model sentences, but you could create them your own. There's some good ones out there. I always think the Bayeux Tapestry, great model sentences. If you're teaching the passive, pictures are great. Here we are. There's the body of King Edward. There's a church. What are these people doing? Ready-made passive sentences for you. Quite simple Latin. And even if you're teaching De Romanis, I mean, this isn't a sentence, but you can still make models to help show the language as well. Super simple. Pater, patres. We can scaffold grammar teaching. Once again, break down the language point. What is it that you want students to learn? Give supports. Each grammar point kind of demands its own supports, I suppose. This is something I think I was teaching conjugations, and in my brain, I was like, right, our conjugations are about categorizing. What supports do I need to give my students to be able to categorize verbs into different conjugations? And the way my mind went was, right, I need the process. I'm going to create a scaffold to show them the process. They can go through the flowchart, would fill that in together. I'll then give them a load of verbs. I'll highlight some bits in bold as a scaffold to show them what bits of the words they're looking at, and then they can use that process. I've removed it gradually as I've gone through it, and then I want them to go find their own ones. So gradually removing that scaffold to be able to allow them to find verbs in different conjugations. When we are supporting grammar teaching, we probably want to be using that familiar vocabulary to reduce cognitive load. If we're teaching a new grammar point, it's not the time, I suppose, to introduce some new whizzy words. Use those simple ones they know, like dog, caecilius, and the things like that, so that they're not doing the thinking of the vocab. And also we need to model how to complete the task, narrate that process. Narrate the process of how you sort a verb into the conjugation. Narrate the narrate the process of how to translate a purpose clause. What is it that you're looking for in that construction? How is it that you do it? Because students, they need that broken down because they're novice learners. Sentence builders, excellent way to scaffold language work. Very popular in MFL teaching at the moment. Some people might be like, well, it's cheating. It's not. It's out exposing students to lots and lots of Latin. So, and it's just providing scaffold, so they're not having to think about too many things at once. For example, you could give your students some Latin sentences that they have to translate into English. You can give them some English that they have to put into Latin. You can ask them to create their own sentences and then get their partner to translate it back. What you can also do with your sentence builder is start off with the translations on it, as what I've got, but you could also remove the translations and just leave the Latin. It would still help them kind of here what I was looking at, noun and adjective agreement. It would still help them form those sentences. And once again, we've got very limited vocab. Sentence builders work really good for complex constructions as well. So for example, if you're doing passives, showing students how to form agents and instruments, um, direct command also indirect command also makes a great sentence builder. And it's kind of getting students to see that vocab with those chunks rather than just a random assortment of sentences straight away. It's breaking down the process. You could always take it away later, but it's all about access. Translation is the one I think most people are a bit daunted by. Translation, super complex task. How can we scaffold it? There's lots of different ways we can do that. I mean, these aren't exhaustive. These are just the first ones that came to my head. When we read the story aloud, how many times actually do we read a story aloud? I mean, when we're doing Cambridge Latin course, we probably do. But when we give our students perhaps an unseen text in a lesson, once I don't know, once we get onto Latin to GCSE, do we ever read it? Because when you're reading the story aloud, you can really emphasize certain words, draw students' attention to it. You can use those online story explorers from CLC and Subarani to support. If we want them to focus more, I suppose, on the grammar, the language, and we don't want them to be spending the whole lesson looking up the words at the back of the dictionary, then, well, that's going to give them a lot of assistance. There are other times when you might want them to look up vocab, different skills. And this is what modeling and scaffolding are all about. You need to pick the skills that you want your students to do. What do you want your students to get out of a story? Reading and translating are different skills. Do you want them to translate it? Do you want them to think, is it more about what's going on for the plot? Are you trying to get them to practice or make inferences about certain grammar? I think often we're guilty, if we teach a reading course, of being like, oh yeah, I'll just do the Gladiatores story next lesson. But are we always thinking about what do we want our students to get out of that story? For what purpose and how am I using it? And that will dictate what scaffolds you're going to put in place. We might have visual supports. Super simple. We might just draw a quick little reminder what the imperfect and perfect endings are and what we translate them with. Put it on the whiteboard so it's something students can refer back to when they're doing some sentences on the imperfect or perfect tense. Or if we're doing Greek, maybe the aorist. This one I find makes a really big difference. Some students are really scared of a big chunk of Latin. And one thing you can do, just change it from a paragraph into like sentences broken down on different lines, can make a really big difference. Still the same text, but it's separated out into, I suppose, less scary chunks. Have a go, see if it works. For some students, that is a scaffold. Obviously, in their GCSE exam, the sentences won't be split up. Hopefully, by the time they get there, they will have been exposed to enough Latin that they're no longer scared of a big chunk of Latin text. Gap fills. What's really important, I would say, about gap fills is to ensure that they're focused rather than random. Don't just remove random words. Think really carefully, what is this gap fill a scaffold for? My one at the top, this was a feedback task for a GCSE exam. And it was some stuff we'd gone over, some tricky parts. I just wanted them to focus on the tricky stuff that I'd already talked to them about. I didn't want them to focus on anything else. Number translation, I know people have different opinions of that. If students are unsure where to start in a sentence, I mean, it depends whether you're trying to teach them to read, to write, or you're very much a find the verb person. But number translation can be helpful. Sometimes you might not think about it. And also mini whiteboards. Mini whiteboards are great. Help reduce the cognitive load. Let students just jot down some info so they can get it out of their brain, play around with some words before formulating their answer. I'm almost done, I think. Once again, English to Latin or Greek, a little bit more complex. But what do we want our students to focus on? Do we need to support their vocab? Do we need to narrate the process? Because we've got a few more things to think about if we're going, I think, the other way, English to Latin or Greek. For example, if you are writing in Latin or Greek, then conjugations are much more important to you than Latin essentially, than if you're going the other way around. You can work out you can translate present tense verb without knowing what conjugation it's in if you're going Latin to English, but if you're going English to Latin, you do need to know the conjugation. It's really important we isolate those steps. So one way we could perhaps scaffold English to Latin, we'll give them the vocab, ask the students to put the endings on, scaffold. They've been given the vocab, but also I've shown them how many, have I even given them the right amount? Show them how many letters that they need to put on the end. If this is still a little bit too much for your students, then well, give them multiple choice. Which endings do I need to choose? And gradually over time, you can reduce those scaffolds. Get students writing, give them a picture. Write me some Latin about this picture, but give them some guidance. Sentence starters. What do they need to put in those sentences? Is there any vocabulary that they need? Providing those scaffolds to let them do the task. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was how important I think it is to model and scaffold the learning process itself. We talk a lot about scaffolding and modeling tasks, but actually we need to model and scaffold classroom routines as well, like modeling the use of mini whiteboards. Write your answer on the mini whiteboard. Wait for the countdown. Show me the answer. Put your answer down. Wipe the mini whiteboard. If we don't model and scaffold kind of what we're doing, then we're going to get chaos rather than kind of slick routines. We've already had this with vocabulary. We need to scaffold and model learning vocabulary. You can't just have kids rock up in year 7 and be like, go away, learn these words. We'll show them how, teach them how to learn the vocab and in the ways you want them to do it. And this might change. The way you want a year 7 to learn a vocabulary will change as will be different to how you want your year 13 to learn their vocabulary. Learning word endings, taking effective notes. Do students know how to do that? If you're teaching set texts, well, what do you actually want them to do? And also moving from GCSE to A level, what does it mean to prepare a text? How should they be using their free periods effectively? Yeah, they've suddenly got free periods. Well, do they actually know how to use them? Model it and scaffold it. Yeah, and that is the end of that. Hope that was useful. I'll what questions do you have? I'll stop my share if I can work out how. There we are.
Thanks ever so much, Lottie. That was really informative and so many useful techniques there. We have got 2 minutes before we start our next session. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Lottie? Maybe not. Lottie, I think you're off the hook.
All good.
Great. All right.